I'm back. How you guys doing? This is going to be a very short video. I want to make a disclaimer. For anyone who doubt whether or not I believe that Negro people were here in America before Columbus, you're wrong. I do believe that Negro people were here before Columbus. However, I'm not confident that African Americans can make the claim that they are direct descendants of those people. Okay? So, with that being said, let me go into this video. I found this poster very intriguing because it was featured on someone's video in reference to making this claim that the individuals depicted in this poster do not represent Africans, despite what the language says. And, I want to put that to rest. But before I do that, I want to touch on this whole notion that they also believe, the Aboriginal community believes, that the white man was so brilliant and masterful that he was able to convince all black people that they came from Africa and not from America. And this particular poster, in my opinion, kind of refutes that. Or it makes it highly improbable that that's the case. Because if you look at this poster, it's written in English. In the 1700s, 16, 17, 1800s, black people were not allowed to read. So this particular poster or message was not aimed at black people. So it was aimed at white people who could read the king's English. So by the language of this poster, it's clear that they're telling white people that black people are coming from Africa. Okay? That's what it's telling them. So if that's the case, then you would also have to assume that if the white man was so brilliant and masterful to convince black people that they came from Africa, he was also masterful to convince even white people of that supposed lie. And I would say with great success, according to them. Now, I'm not going to give the white man that kind of power or that kind of credit of being that brilliant. I think it's just a pure case of black people not accepting the fact that they're African, and would rather believe this far outrageous notion that we were all brainwashed. I'm not buying it. So I could go into this. I could talk about this subject all day, but I'm not going to waste too much time because, like I said, I promise this will be a short video. And so we're going to get into this particular poster. And first, we're going to start with the particular figures that are depicted here. One YouTuber suggested, well, these aren't Africans. I mean, what Africans dress like this, with the headdress on and, with feathers. Nah, these not Africans. So if you do a little research, you will see there are many African tribes that wear feathers. Okay, so here's a guy or brother from South Africa who has a ceremonial headdress. You can clearly see it has feathers. And I'm just going to run through this. And we're going to go here to the Kumba tribe. And they're in Central Africa, the Congo. And as you look at his feathers, I mean, they almost look like the feathers that Native Indians or Native Americans would wear. Very similar, And look at this brother right here. Look what he has on. It almost looks just like the picture depicted here. Right? It almost looks like that, right? Very similar. And so you kind of wonder, could they be the same people? May not be, but a lot of Africans pretty much dress pretty much the same way. So this whole notion that these can't be representative of Africans is ridiculous. Now there's hundreds of photographs that show Africans wearing feathers. So the only reason why we can't conceive of that imagery is because that's not the imagery that we've been fed through American media and propaganda. You know, we're just used to seeing Africans depicted with flies in their eyes and, you know, big pot bellies and things of that nature. And no wonder, you know, black people don't want to be associated with that. You know, so we just deny that we are that and we claim something else. And that's all there is to it. Okay, let's go into this video, this particular poster here. Now, this poster, like I said again, this poster is directed at white people now, people who can read. So, obviously, according to you, Aboriginal community, they're even trying to convince white people we're from Africa, way back in the 1700s, which I find preposterous. But anyway, to be sold on the board the ship. Now, Bonds Island is basically referring to where they come from. And this is Bonds Island. And Bonds Island is located in Sierra Leone. And it was a British slave post in the 18th century. From its shores, tens of thousands of Africans were forcibly shipped to the American colonies. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the things that definitely tell where these people are from. And it was that shipped to Ashley Ferry. Now, here's Ashley Ferry, a little thing about that. Let me go up here and start up here. Okay, now, in this particular article, they're referring to 3 ships. And let me read the first paragraph. 3 ships carrying captured West Africans arrived in the Carolina colony between May 1760 and September 1761, ending long voyages at Ashley Ferry Town, 7 miles up the Ashley River. Okay, now you can read that. It's online. All this information that I'm talking about is online. If you want to know, you can get the information and find out. Okay? Now, I like this particular paragraph right here is interesting. No manifest identifies these shackled passengers by name. One statistic, however, reveals that of the 869 people placed on the 3 vessels, 131 of them died during the Atlantic crossing. The people were captured at the West Africa rice growing region and no doubt were valued for their skills in cultivating and lucrative crop. Okay? So let's move down here. Negroes just arrived from the Windward Rice Coast. Now here's the Windward Rice Coast, right here. You have Senegambia, Sierra Leone, the Gold Coast, and Benin. All right, these are the rice cultivators. This is where this ship came from. Okay, it's called the Windward Coast. Okay, so that's pretty much talks about where they come from. Okay, so there's no doubt in my mind that this is representing Africans coming to America. There's no question. Okay, now there's another argument that the Aboriginal community had. They say, well, the Africans, they don't even know anything about slavery. You know, most Africans never even heard about slavery in America. So if they didn't know, then, you know, what makes you think that this was real? You know, so I found this article, and there's several articles that talk about, and basically, let me see if I can get the top portion of it. Africa's role in slavery. Now, you could Google this particular article, and you could read it for yourself. And it just basically talks about the history. And so, but I'm going to read a section of this for all of those individuals in the Aboriginal community who says Africa don't know nothing about it. It's a lie. They know everything about it. They just kept their mouth shut out of shame. So let me read this part. As Thomas Sowell, a black conservative American scholar, has pointed out, the efforts of the European nations to wipe out slavery have been virtually ignored. Incredibly, late in human history, he writes, a mass moral revulsion finally set in against slavery, first in the 18th century and then during the 19th century throughout Western civilizations. But only Western civilizations. Africans, Arabs, and Asians continue to resist giving up their slaves, only because the Western powers was at its peak in the 19th century. Was West imperialism able to impose the abolition of slavery around the world, as it imposed the rest of its beliefs and agendas for good and evil? Let me see if I can find that paragraph so you guys can read it. I don't want to read it and then, okay, here we go. Here we are. Thomas Sowell. This is the paragraph I just read. Okay, so I'm just going to continue, bring it up a little bit more so you guys can follow me here. This is the paragraph I just read. Thomas Sowell, a black conservative. So I'm over here. The resistance, okay? Okay. The resistance put up by Africans, Asians, and Arabs was monumental in defense of slavery and lasted for more than a century, Sowell writes. Only the overwhelming military power of the West enabled it to prevail on this issue, and only the moral outrage of Western people kept the government's feet to the fire politically to maintain the pressure against slavery around the world. Okay? Ghanaian diplomat Kofi Atwanar has also written, I believe there's a great psychic shadow over Africa, and it's much to do with our guilt and denial of our role in the slave trade. We too are blameworthy and what was essentially one of the most heinous crimes in human history. Okay, so you have a diplomat who is taking ownership of the slave trade for his people. Let's read on. In 2000, at an observance attended by delegates from several European countries and the United States, officials from Benin, publicist President Matthew Karekou's apology for his country's role in selling fellow Africans by millions to white slavers. We cry, he goes on, he says, we cry for forgiveness and reconciliation, said Luke Kankaja, Benin's Minister of Environment and Housing. Cyril Angon, Benin's ambassador to the United States, acknowledged, we share in the responsibility for this human tragedy. A year later, the president of Senegal, Abdoulaye Wade, who himself, the descendants of generations of slave owners and slave trading African kings, urged Europeans, Americans, and Africans to acknowledge publicly and teach openly about their shared responsibility for the Atlantic slave trade. Wade's remarks came shortly after the release of the first American film who looked at the African involvement in the slave trade with the West by Ivory Coast director Roger Gunmabla. It is up to us, Mbabla declared, to talk about slavery, open the wounds of what we've always hidden to stop being peril when we put responsibilities on others. Okay? In our own oral tradition, slavery is left out purposely because Africans are ashamed when we confront slavery. Let's wake up and look at ourselves through our own image. Okay? But African slaveholders and slave traders didn't think of themselves and their slaves as Africans. Instead, they thought of themselves as tribal terms and their slaves as foreign or inferior. What William Wilberforce and other abolitionists vanquished, one writer explains, was something even worse than slavery, something that was much more fundamental that could hardly be seen from where we stand today. They vanquished in the very mindset that made slavery acceptable and allowed it to survive and thrive for millennia. They destroyed the entire way of seeing the world, one that they had sway from the beginning of history, and placed it with another way of seeing the world. Okay, so you can read and continue to read, but I just want to make sure you guys understood that there are Africans, countries, who take ownership of their role. So let's not get it twisted, guys. We are Africans. And Africans are coming to understand that they had a role. They played a major role in how we ended up here. All right. Until next time.